Something terrible happened to children in the Ohio woods over a century ago, and according to Ed and Lorraine Warren, the land never forgot. In the wooded ravines along Swift Run Creek near Vermilion, Ohio, the crumbling foundation and partial ruins of what locals have long called the Gore Orphanage stand as silent witnesses to documented suffering so profound that it allegedly imprinted itself on the very fabric of reality. This is not merely folklore or campfire legend. This is a case where the documented historical record of genuine child abuse intersects with decades of consistent paranormal testimony, investigated by two of the most renowned demonologists in modern history. The place that folklore named Gore Orphanage was actually known as the Light of Hope Orphanage, operated in the early 20th century by Reverend Johann Sprunger and his wife. In 1909, Ohio humane authorities descended on the facility following troubling allegations, and what they found shocked even hardened investigators of that era. Between 90 and 100 children were discovered living in conditions that the official reports described as unconscionable. Inadequate food left children malnourished and desperate. Physical abuse was systematic and severe. The living conditions amounted to little more than squalor, with dozens of vulnerable young lives warehoused in misery in the isolated woods where no one could hear them cry. The findings were so disturbing that authorities shuttered the institution immediately. Yet remarkably, no prosecution followed because Ohio law at that time contained no applicable statutes to address such institutional abuse of children. The children were removed and the orphanage ceased operation, but the suffering that had occurred in that hollow remained, absorbed into the soil and stone and the very air of Swift Run Creek. By the time Ed and Lorraine Warren became aware of the site during their Ohio Valley investigations of the 1980s, the ruins had already become one of the most widely visited alleged haunted locations in the entire state. Generations of locals and curiosity seekers had ventured into Swift's Hollow, drawn by stories that had grown increasingly dramatic over the decades, embellished by the natural human tendency to elaborate on the macabre. Yet beneath the folklore embellishments, beneath the exaggerated tales told around campfires and whispered in high school hallways, a consistent core of paranormal testimony persisted across decades and across hundreds of independent witnesses. The phenomena reported at the site fell into several distinct categories that Ed Warren found highly significant. The sound of children was the most frequently and consistently reported experience. Witnesses described hearing crying, calling, and sometimes laughter echoing through the ruins and the surrounding woods. These were not vague impressions or sounds easily attributed to wind or wildlife. Investigators who spent extended periods at the location reported hearing these sounds with remarkable clarity and spatial specificity, able to pinpoint apparent locations of the voices with the precision one would use to locate an actual living person speaking nearby. What made these reports particularly compelling to Warren was that they came from witnesses with no prior knowledge of the site's history, as well as from those who had come specifically seeking paranormal experience. The sounds were heard by skeptics and believers alike, by daytime visitors and nighttime investigators across seasons and weather conditions. Lights represented another category of consistent phenomena. Multiple witnesses over the years described seeing lights moving among the ruins at times when no other individuals were present on the property. These were not the diffuse, ground-level glow associated with swamp gas or other natural phosphorescence, but directed, purposeful points of light that moved in patterns suggesting deliberate human activity, as if someone were walking the grounds with a lantern, checking on rooms, moving with intention through space. Perhaps most unsettling was the persistent quality of observation that witnesses reported, the overwhelming sense of being watched by multiple presences simultaneously. This feeling was so consistently described by independent witnesses across decades that Warren treated it as one of the most reliably documented aspects of the site's phenomenology. It was not the casual sensation of eyes on you that anyone might experience in an isolated location, but a specific, focused quality of attention that witnesses described as unmistakably purposeful and often deeply uncomfortable. When Ed and Lorraine Warren finally visited Swift's Hollow as part of their broader survey of paranormally active locations in the Ohio Valley, they brought with them the full resources of their New England Society for Psychic Research team, including documentation specialists and the rigorous investigative protocols they had refined across decades in the field. For Lorraine, whose clairvoyant sensitivity had been tested and demonstrated in case after case throughout her career, the experience at the ruins was immediate and profoundly affecting. She later described walking into the site and being struck by what felt like a physical wave of accumulated childhood sorrow, an emotional residue so concentrated and so powerful that she ranked it among the most intense residual impressions she had encountered in her entire investigative career. She stood for a sustained period in the area that historical records indicated had been the location of the main orphanage structure, and there she reported receiving layered impressions of children in distress. These were not specific individual spirits that she could identify or communicate with, but rather a generalized, accumulated presence of young lives marked by fear, deprivation, and suffering. In her professional assessment, these were textbook residual phenomena, the psychic echo of genuine historical trauma replaying in the environment where it had originally occurred, like a recording embedded in the location itself. Ed Warren, reviewing the documented historical record of the Light of Hope Orphanage alongside the field observations his team had gathered, concluded that the site's paranormal reputation was grounded in genuine residual phenomena of remarkable intensity. The suffering of those 90 to 100 children, sustained over months or years in that isolated location, had generated exactly the kind of concentrated emotional and psychic energy that his theoretical framework predicted could persist in an environment for generations. This was not folklore or imagination. This was the documented mechanism by which historical trauma could become paranormal phenomenon. However, Ed's assessment did not stop with the residual layer. He made a critical distinction that would shape the spiritual response his team would ultimately undertake. Residual phenomena, however intense and however disturbing to witness, are not dangerous in the active sense. They are recordings, replays, echoes without consciousness or will. They do not pursue the living, they do not make choices, and they cannot direct their attention or their energy towards specific individuals. But Warren identified something else at Swift's Hollow, something layered beneath or alongside or within the residual energy. He detected what he characterized as an aware presence, something distinct from the children's suffering, something that was reactive to the investigation team's presence and activity. This entity possessed the quality of purposeful attention and focused awareness that Ed associated not with human spirits, but with inhuman intelligence. This secondary presence did not manifest with the overt physical aggression or the dramatic poltergeist activity that characterized cases of full demonic infestation, but its awareness of the investigation and its apparent interest in specific members of the team, particularly Lorraine herself, warranted immediate implementation of the protective spiritual measures that had become standard Warren protocol. Ed theorized that sites of powerful residual energy, especially those associated with the suffering of vulnerable populations like children, could attract intelligent entities that fed on or utilized that concentrated energy as a resource. The suffering of the children had created the residual layer, but something else had been drawn to that suffering, something that remained long after the orphanage had closed and the children had been removed or had grown or had died. The spiritual response that the Warrens organized involved two distinct approaches corresponding to these two layers of phenomena. For the residual layer, for the accumulated suffering of the children themselves, the Warrens participated in organizing a memorial prayer service conducted at the site with full clergy assistance. This ceremony was directed at the spiritual acknowledgement of those who had suffered in that place and the offering of intercession for whatever rest or passage might still be available to them across the barrier of decades. Lorraine described this memorial service as one of the most moving spiritual experiences of her career, and she reported that it produced a perceptible shift in the quality of emotional residue she had detected during her initial assessment. The change was not total elimination, as residual phenomena cannot be fully resolved through prayer in the way that intelligent presences can be directly addressed and expelled. But there was a softening, a reduction in the intensity of the accumulated sorrow that the site projected into the awareness of sensitive individuals. For the secondary intelligent presence, the entity that Ed had identified as aware and reactive and potentially malevolent, a formal rite of exorcism was conducted at the ruins with full clerical authority. This exorcism was aimed at expelling the entity from the location and denying it further access to the site's residual energy as a feeding source or anchor point. The combination of memorial prayer for the victims and formal exorcism against the predator represented the integrated approach that Ed Warren had developed over decades of fieldwork, an approach that recognized both the human dimension of historical suffering and the inhuman exploitation that such suffering could enable. The Gore Orphanage site at Swift's Hollow has remained one of Ohio's most persistently visited paranormal locations, its reputation continually renewed by each generation of curiosity seekers and ghost hunters. What distinguishes it from purely folkloric haunted sites is the documented historical suffering that grounds its paranormal claims in verifiable tragedy. The Warren investigation of the site in the 1980s contributed to broader understanding within the paranormal research community about the relationship between historical trauma and residual phenomena, the mechanism by which genuine human suffering could persist in an environment long after the individuals involved had departed. Ed Warren referenced Swift's Hollow in numerous discussions and lectures about how the paranormal investigator's responsibility extended beyond confronting the active intelligent entities that drove the most dramatic and dangerous cases, encompassing as well the residual suffering embedded in sites of historical tragedy. The memorial dimension of the work, praying for those whose suffering had created the conditions of the haunting, was in Warren's view as spiritually important as the exorcistic dimension of expelling malevolent entities. The ruins continue to stand in the Ohio woods today, still visited by those drawn by reputation and curiosity, still carrying whatever remains of the sorrow that was compressed into its soil across more than a century of accumulated memory and pain. Hashtags number Gore Orphanage, number Ed and Lorraine Warren, number True Horror Story, number Paranormal Investigation, number Haunted Ohio, number Swift's Hollow, number Real Ghost Stories, number Demonologist Files, number Warren Case Files, number Haunted Orphanage, number Residual Haunting, number Paranormal Documentary, number True Paranormal, number Ghost Hunting, number Vanishing Roads. This story was created with AI assistance based on documented paranormal case files. All events reference real investigations by Ed and Lorraine Warren.